O King, my King, Genesis has a continuum of stories which follow along the early lineage of Christ, but laced into these stories is powerful catechesis. The dichotomy between Jacob and Esau is a particular one that I'd like to focus on today, revealing things you may know and things you may not know. 1. Esau was born first, and so Isaac, his father, the son of Abraham, was convinced that Esau was going to receive the right of lineage. But Isaac had not given him the blessing yet. For anyone who's ever read the visions of Blessed Catherine and Emmerich, that blessing was a full-on rite, like an ordination, not just a sign of a cross over a person and an amen. 2. He is twin brothers with Jacob, and they were the only birth that Rebekah, their mother, had gone through. 3. Esau's name is associated with being red and hairy, but it's not definitively so. Some say it has a lot to do with action or being active, or being of a more primitive nature. Jacob's name means to set heel down, to be clandestine or clandestine. 4. When Rebekah was pregnant with these twins, the womb was often upset. So Rebekah consulted God and was told that there were 2 nations in her womb, and that the younger would dominate and consume the older. The younger outdoing the older was a common theme in Genesis, but I won't delve too much into that today. I'll go over a little bit later. 5. When they were born, Esau came out first and Jacob second, which is why Esau was supposed to have the right. Rebekah, however, remembered the prophecy. Isaac remembered Esau, but Rebekah favored Jacob. 6. The reason for the favor was beyond older or younger. Esau was someone who enjoyed hunting and being outdoors, which Father Isaac liked, while Jacob was more quiet and domestic. 7. If I could venture a guess based on how I personally psychologically profile individuals, Esau was likely the sort of man who was emotional and impulsive, who externalized, who was macho and athletic, who tried to associate strength with acuity of movement, focus, and an outward show of force. He probably had a quick temper, was sanguine or choleric in temperament, or sanguine in the beginning before turning choleric as an adult. 8. Following that, the psychological profile on Jacob was probably that he was more timid and softly spoken, that his words were cutting, sharp, honed, and that he would have been more phlegmatic or melancholic, that is, calculated. But as his name suggests, he's cunning, clever as a serpent. Although he was favored by his mother, I do not think that he was so much a mama's boy, but these are just guesses. 9. Abraham was rooted from the place we call Mesopotamia, the 4 rivers, or modern-day Iraq, upriver from where Babylon was, like going towards Syria. And he came around the Fertile Crescent and settled, and the Fertile Crescent is through Syria and down the Mediterranean coast going towards Egypt. And he settled in Canaan because of the nation God promised him there. Canaan is where what we would call Palestine is, where modern day Israel insists it needs to be. And Abraham did not want Isaac marrying a Canaanite, so he sent his servant to go fetch his son Isaac a girl out east, that is, back up the Fertile Crescent towards Babylon. Not quite all the way there, but towards there. That girl was Rebekah, who had married Isaac and bore the two children. And I also believe it's where the Aramaic people were. 10. Obviously, Palestine at the time was a corridor of trade between the three tribes of Noah. So migration was frequent there. The land was good and the location was central before humanity got a lot more naval and traveled the Mediterranean Sea quite a bit. Now, Egypt's early stability at this time caused more migration to take place. 11. The local Canaanites, because they were uncouth, disorganized, and they worshipped idols and demon magics, were to be looked down upon. Humans have dominion over cattle, and they purposely breed their cattle with the purpose was to create healthier cattle. It should not come to anyone as a surprise then that in ancient times the children of men who were idolaters were seen as maladjusted individuals who came with deep-seated baggage, like cattle that was just allowed to breed with each other willy-nilly. As well as, they would come with random genetics. They're often born in quote-unquote vomited circumstances. That is to say, they were born in incest relations or as bastards, raised in situations that damaged their catechesis rather than elevating them to wisdom, and exposed them to demonic nonsense like child slavery and witchery. 12. Saying all of that, Isaac and Rebekah were not fond of Esau having married the local color, because they would infect their own bloodline with the nonsense that defined the Canaanite individuals. The son of Jacob, or Israel, fourth-born Judah, that is, the fourth-born Judah, would inherit this genetic right. And he was a son of Leia, by the way. Anyways, and he married a Canaanite woman at first and had 4 sons with her, but that caused real problems, especially with the first 2. Ultimately, that Canaanite woman he married, did not give him the lineage, but it was actually the woman he set aside for his 3rd son that did, whom he mistook for a temple prostitute because he was neglecting her because his 3rd son had come of age and he wasn't uniting them. Anyways, he neglected her, and then she schemed him and pretended to be a prostitute, and he slept with her, and she bore Judah twins, but she was Aramaean. So yeah, this was a mess. Anyway, this is a common theme in the Old Testament. I don't know what Isaac's plan was, but Rebekah and Jacob were plotting to take the blessing from Esau. 13. We think of the tragic circumstances, and this is elaborating on the Canaanite women point. Fast forwarding to the history books and the book of Judges on Samson's story and how he went after Philistine women, and it turned out to be his downfall. We also consider King Solomon's example of having married so many women and them taking their false idols into the temple of God and polluting the temple. This was the general point, that marrying foreigners would pollute the worship of God with idolatry, which was peppered all over the Old Testament. 13. Now Esau was tired one day and asked Jacob to make him something to eat. Jacob said he would if Esau would give him the birthright. So Esau said yes to him, and Jacob made him, a lentil stew, and played the serpent. 14. Isaac was old and blind, so Jacob and Rebekah tricked Isaac into blessing Jacob, thinking he was blessing Esau. Now this rite was described in detail by Blessed Catherine Ann Emmerich in her visions, And here it goes to show that it was prophesied to go to the younger brother while they were still in the womb. And Isaac couldn't see what was obvious, that Jacob was more worthy of it. And because he couldn't see that, it's like blindness was manifested into Isaac. Decisions we make often stem our ailments as a type of God's providence, so as to alarm us to the weaknesses in the soul. 15. Esau got enraged, proving the point that he wasn't worthy. So Jacob was shuffled off back to Aramea or Mesopotamia to Rebekah's brother Laban. Laban had 2 daughters. Jacob loved the younger one, Rachel, because she was comely. But Laban needed to marry off his elder daughter, Leia, who had sore eyes. These 2 girls are in and of themselves a dichotomy like Jacob and Esau, but I won't get into that. Laban, however, like his sister, was perhaps a bit serpenty, bit cunning, and made a deal with Jacob to make him work 7 years to earn the hand of Rachel, but on their wedding night, got Jacob really drunk and sent Leah to bed him instead to consummate their union instead of that of Rachel and Jacob. So he had to work an additional 7 years under Laban to earn Rachel. 16. He had some episodes which were perhaps the result of his contemplation. We have the ladder, which stretches out to heaven, where angels passed to and from heaven, and showed that the earth was being worked. 17. The one where he got his name of Israel, which the OT tells us means one who struggles or wrestles with God, was an interesting vision that prophetically hinted at the struggle, the 12 tribes of Israel, who were going to deal with living in that trade corridor at the center of the known world. Sorry about that. The angels were working in the foreign territory, and God was working Israel to stand tall among them so as to prepare the coming of the Messiah. 18. Jacob himself, when he was being a shepherd for Laban, purposely bred his sheep for a purpose. Now, in being a shepherd, he was catechized. Another trope of the OT, the Old Testament. Abel was a shepherd, and so was King David. Jacob, being a shepherd, expresses humanity's role as a steward, a tender, and a guide. I encountered a similar type of catechesis when I was world building when writing for my novels, and I had to write vivid characters and vivid settings and work on all of the mundane details so as to make the novel seem as intricate and as self-animated as possible, like it were a careful craft of mine. Now, when world building, I had been playing the father, and it gave me a pretty powerful perspective on what it's like to play the father or to be the father, and what it's like dealing with obstinate characters and having to plot around their natural path of animation. And I suspect being a shepherd had a similar effect on people, that it naturally catechized them to understanding God more. 19. Because Esau had enjoyed hunting for game, his philosophy ended up getting built on the success of his endeavors. But when his philosophy ends up riddled with junk knowledge, the reliance on instinct, for example, the constant fight for survival, the draconism. And when I say draconism, I mean like getting competitive and engaged in activity that sets you against others because you're trying to be superior to them, and wasting your time on the development of skills that don't catechize you in any way, in any holy way at least, but rather in a somewhat Luciferian way, developing your pride rather than your humility. 20. Where, being a shepherd of living things, and we contrast Abel and Cain here, which is another report in itself, one learns how to read a lamb for its expressions, how to harvest them maximally and get the most out of them, how to love them all the same. And I believe Jacob, being a shepherd for 14 years, was God catechizing him in a prophetic way when he had to win 2 separate women over. The first woman, the laborious one, and the second woman, the beautiful and contemplative one. 21. 14 is an interesting number. The generations from Abraham to Christ were 14 times 3. But the book of Genesis gives us plenty of dichotomies between the younger and the older sibling. How 7 had to be worked for one and 7 had to be worked for the next. This prophetically symbolizes, I believe, the rise and fall of Israel, the laborious, the Leia, and the rise and fall of Catholicism, the loving one, the Rachel. After Christ's advent, who is the one that was adored? The second daughter ended up being consummated by the birth of the second child, whom his father called a ravening wolf, in the late chapters of Genesis. 22. Joseph ended up being the worthier child of Rachel, giving Israel 2 half-tribes through Ephraim and Manasseh, unfortunately later given to the rebel tribes and becoming Samaria. Benjamin's tribe, however, would go to war with the rest of Israel, and this was in the book of Judges, because their sons had taken on the ways of foreigners and reincarnated the errors of Sodom in the city of Gibeah. Joseph himself was Israel's prodigy child, however. 23. There is much to contemplate in the book of Genesis, my king. That which reads like a simple narrative is in itself not simply powerful catechesis, it is also powerfully prophetic for those with eyes to hear and eyes to see and ears to hear. In all things we do, we meditate, if not on purpose. This is why it is so important that even in leisure, we try to insert the Lord into our affairs and use everything we do as occasion to contemplate. Remember, we are what we eat. If we are unfairly sentenced to a situation which we may deem unjust, we must approach it as though, like Jacob, having had to work 14 years for the one he loves, God has something to say to us, to teach us through the injustices inflicted upon us. And if we're as smart as he thinks we are, we'll figure it out. If we but persist in patience and in the knowledge that God is always good and right and that we trust in him. So then our penance will have been paid, for it was prophesied to Adam that he would work the soil in vain. So like Leah was penance and sorrow, Rachel was the glory. Like Eve was penance and sorrow, Mary was the glory.